Hi, I'm Stefan Karlsson. I'm the director and the curator of the Swedish Tank Museum. And I started my military service in 1984. I've been serving as an army officer for more than 20 years, working on tanks, different kinds. And I've been asked to pick my top 5 at Bovington Tank Museum, which for me is an honor to do that. But with the current corona situation, I'm not able to travel. So thought do it a bit differently. And I happen to know that in Bovington there are a few Swedish vehicles that I have been involved with in different ways, and I'm going to explain to you why these vehicles are special for me. And if you're interested in our collection here in Sweden, we have quite a few vehicles of different types, and you could check our YouTube channel or Facebook, and hopefully one day when all this is over, we will be able to travel and look at different collections again. But in the meantime, we and other museums, we are trying to get to you instead. So I hope you will enjoy this tour. And this one is my number 5, the IKV-91, a Swedish light tank developed and produced in the early mid-1970s. And in Sweden it was not intended to be used as a light tank. It was intended to be sort of a tank destroyer, a support vehicle for the infantry, and equipped with a low pressure gun firing high explosives. That was the kind of ammunition at the time that they thought this will be the future, but then later on they realized that the fin stabilized projectiles were much better, and the high explosive they could not develop as much as they thought in the 1970s. And that is one of the reasons why this vehicle didn't have a very long service in the Swedish Army. So it does not weigh that much, is 16 tons, which is not much, but the result is that you cannot have that much armor protection. So you have to reduce the armor protection in order to reduce the weight of the vehicle. So the armor protection is 20 millimeters approximately. Only protection for small arms, shrapnel, etc. So the real protection for the vehicle was the speed and the possibility to travel almost anywhere. So this was a vehicle that could go in all sorts of terrain, swamp, swim over rivers, lakes, etc. Absolutely fantastic. And in 1984, when I was supposed to start my military service, I was assigned to be the commander of an IKV-91. How cool is that? The vehicle was about less than 10 years old at the time. It was the most modern vehicle we had in the Swedish Army at the time, so this was really something great to be the commander of this one. I was so proud. And during the last years of my school, I wrote to the regiment in Strängnäs and asked them, would it be possible to come for a week and see how things are as an officer, because I already had decided I want to join the army, so I would like to learn a bit more about that kind of job. And I said, yeah, okay, no problem, welcome. So I went there for a week, together with the unit using the IKVs in Strängnäs. fantastic. I learned everything that was possible to know. Got the instruction manual, read it from back and forth, so I knew everything about this vehicle. Life was great. So, closer to June 1984, I got a letter from the regiment. Welcome to the 4th Tank Company, Centurion tanks. No, this is wrong. I'm supposed to be in the IKV, not the Centurion tank. So I phoned them and I asked, what is this? And they calmly said, well, this year we don't have any IKV training, so you're on tanks. Same, but a bit bigger. No problem. Bye-bye. Disaster. My whole life gone to pieces. What's going to happen now? I was supposed to be in this vehicle and all of a sudden in a tank. But of course, you have to deal with things like that, so I got over it. Then I will talk about that later. So this is the IKV 91. That was one of the best vehicles produced in the Swedish Army for many, many years. Fantastic cross-country performance. It could travel anywhere. Laser rangefinder, the hunter-kill function for the commander. It was just great. And from this vehicle, Hägglunds then developed the CV90. And from my point of view, the CV90 is probably the best fighting vehicle in the world. And they used these experiences from this vehicle into that vehicle to make it as good as it possibly could be. But because I was that close to this is only number 5. This is my number 4, the Landsverk L-60, designed during the 1930s in Sweden by the company Landsverk, which was actually owned by the German industry. So the cooperation between Sweden and Germany in between the wars was quite strong. And a lot of influences that were made in the Swedish factory in Sweden also went into the German tanks, the early German tanks. This M40 is a bit upgraded from the M38 and M39, and they were similar to the Hungarian Toldi, that Hungary got the license from Landsverk to build their own tanks, which they used on the Eastern Front during the Second World War. And this is a bit more armor protection, otherwise pretty much the same tank. And the one in Bovington got there in 1960 as a gift from Sweden. That was a few years after the Swedish Army had taken them out of service. And in 1956, I think it was 25 of them that were sold to the Dominican Republic, where they were used against the US Marine Corps in 1960. An old tank against modern tanks didn't end up that well. But the tank in Bovington ended up there in 1960, and I saw it for the first time when I was there in 95. David Fletcher took me for a tour in the museum, and we spoke about the Landsverk L-60. Fantastic vehicle, and this and the one in Bovington are the only two remaining of this M40L in Europe. And the one in Bovington is in fact the only running of its kind in the world. So that's quite unique. In 2004, David Willey called me, and they were planning for taking out the Swedish fleet on Tankfest that year. And they asked for a bit of advice and if possible if I could come with some people to help out to prepare before that event and to do some work on the tanks. So I picked a few people, different skills, and we went off a couple of days ahead of Tankfest, and plan was to drive the Centurion 104, the IKV 91, the S-Tank, and this one. This vehicle had some problems, and it had been standing for a long time, and they had been trying to get it running, and so it was running, but it wasn't running properly. So we tried to do what we could during the few days we had before the event, and one of the problems was the hydraulic gearbox, which is down there in front of the engine. And I will come back to that a bit later. So we, after everything we had done on the tank, we barely went through the arena. It could drive, and we had it running for, I think it was two laps. But that was not working as it should. So we decided that we need to come back. And I think it was a year later, and we managed to find out what was causing the problem. That was the hoses down there. Very easy to get to. I say very easy, it's not. They were leaking. So the fluid in the hydraulic gearbox went out, and that was causing the problem. So it had no power to move. So we managed to replace those hoses and fill it up again. And after that, it was working very, very good. So we came back in 2008 and a couple of other times following Tankfest, and also we went back there in 2014 to make 2 laps in the arena. So this is the driver's position of the Landsverk L-60, and in this variant there is a special gearbox, a hydraulic torque converter that you start on, and then you have a normal clutch that you use for high speed. And it's I think it's the only tank I have ever come across with this kind of gearbox, but it's quite nice. This is the gear lever, and you take it forward. There is the hydraulic torque converter, which you start on from 0 up to about 10 kilometers an hour, and then you put it in the manual gear, disconnect the hydraulic torque converter and connect the clutch in the rear. And this is the low range, where you can travel up to about 25 kilometers an hour. There is also a high range, which is on the other side, where you can start on 3 up to about 20 kilometers an hour. And then to the manual position at the rear, up to about 45. And then when you're reducing speed again, you go back to the hydraulic, and then up to, depending on if you're going up or down in speed. So it's some sort of a semi-automatic gearbox. Very special, but works pretty well. So I have been repairing and also been driving the only running L-60 M40L in the world, and that tank is in Bovington Tank Museum. And that's why this is my number 4. So this is my number 3, the famous S-Tank. probably one of the most famous tanks in the world. Even if a lot of people say, well, it's not a tank because it doesn't have any turret. It's a turretless tank. And it was designed to be used as a tank, and it was used in Sweden as a tank, and that's why it is a tank. How it looks doesn't really matter. It's the function and intention of using it. Designed by Sven Berger and built by Bofors in early mid-1960s. A fantastic vehicle at this time, and the one in Bovington has this bar armor on the front, and we have decided not to put the bar armor on because this is how most people in Sweden recognize the vehicle from their service, because this bar armor was secret until 1992. And under here there are holes with plastic plugs inside, and those plastic plugs, they were supposed to be blown off by explosives in case of war. So you put explosives under and then ignite, and they went, it actually happened, they went through the roof in the storage when they tested this. And then you mount the bar armor at the front. And this was something that was part of the protection and kept secret until 1992. So this is the driver's position on the left side with the rear driver behind me, and to the right the commander. And in front of us there is the diesel engine on the right side of the vehicle and the gas turbine on the left side. So there are two different engines working together in this tank, and that's also quite unique to have that combination of a diesel engine and a gas turbine. Lovely tank to drive. It's quite easy. It moves fantastic, and to shoot with it, it's absolutely adorable because it's so stable with the fixed gun and the fixed sight, and the optics, they are absolutely top of the art. I have not seen anything better on a tank ever than this one. Not even the Leopard 2 is as good as the S-tank optics, and that came out in mid-1960s. The driver's hatch is a bit scary, and it closes like this, and it's quite heavy. And there has been accidents with the hatch in this or in the rear position, where the locking device not working properly. And if you stop the tank quickly, the hatch comes forward and knock you in the back of the head. And if you're standing with the head above, which often was the case when you were driving, you looked out above the periscope, then the periscope and your teeth went in here with the hatch in the back of the head. And I have a few colleagues that have done that experience, and that's not something that you want to happen. So that's why there is a safety chain that needs to be connected to prevent this from happening. And with things heavy, a lot of weight, there are accidents that can happen, and sometimes does, but luckily we have been fortunate to not have that many accidents, but it happens. This tank is a bit special, the S-tank for me, because this is the first type of tank that I ever did drive myself. and I was about 9 years old. And where I lived, there was an infantry regiment, and they had once a year cooperation with the armor regiment in the south, and they come to visit, and that happened to be during the school holiday in the winter. And for some reason I managed to find out that it happened, and I persuaded my parents to drive me out there, and I was standing there, and the guys in the tank saw this little guy, 9 years old, standing there, and felt sorry for him, so they invited him to come up to the tank to look inside the tank. And all of a sudden I was standing on the floor of the driver's position, and they helped me because I wasn't long enough, so I could stand on the floor and I could look through the periscope out there. And they started the engine, switched into gear, and told me to press the accelerator. And I still remember that it was quite hard to press the accelerator to get the tank moving, and it moved, and I was driving the tank about 10-20 meters, I don't really remember, and then reverse, and then went back again. And my parents said afterwards that they were terrified standing there outside, realizing our son is in that vehicle and it's moving. And then I came out and said, oh, I have been driving it. And they didn't believe it, but that was the truth. So 9 years old, I drove this tank for the first time, and that is why this is my number 3. The Centurion tank, and this is Strickline 104. It's a diesel upgraded version that we used in Sweden. But the Centurion tank is very special to me. So this is my number 2. I started off as a tank commander in 1984 in the Mark 10. Spent 12 months almost every day in that tank in the commander seat together with fantastic crew members, and we learned how to live in there, to sleep, to eat, and that was a fantastic year. And the following years I was training crew members on these tanks, drivers, commanders, gunners and loaders. The diesel version is much more reliable than the old one with the petrol engine, and when we went from the petrol engine to the diesel converted, it was like a race car. We could drive 10 kilometers faster. We went from 35 to 45. But it was much more reliable, and it was much more easy to drive. So we could use the tank in a different way than we had been using before. But it was still the same crap suspension, the same crap vision from different positions, and it had a lot of drawbacks, but we learned to live with that, and I will tell you a bit more about that. So this is the driver's position of the Centurion tank, and we always taught the drivers to drive with the hatch closed, to be prepared for combat and not something that you had to stop and close the hatches, because they were quite heavy to open and close. So they were always driving with hatch closed, with the small periscopes, which is not very good vision out, and this one were pointing quite near the tank, so you could see the edge of the road and part of the tank, so you could find out where to line up the tank. And this one you had for the far distance, so you could look further away. Not very good visibility, but that's what it was. And as a commander or a loader in the turret, you always had to help the driver, guiding which direction to go, and if you were going reverse, he didn't have a possibility to see anything. So we needed to look for him and tell him which direction to go. And there was one episode when I was a platoon commander and I had a very good driver. We were going along a road and it was a turn, so we turned left, went another maybe 50, 100 meters, stopped, looked for the enemy, gunner, looked what's on the other side, and we decided to go reverse and find another way. So I said, driver, reverse, and I looked to my rear and prepared to guide the driver, and he reversed, and then all of a sudden he turned. I didn't say anything. He turned again. I didn't say anything, and he kept going on the road. And then we stopped, and I asked him after, how come that I didn't have to help you? You didn't see anything. Well, the bend was there when I got forward, and I thought it must be there when I'm reversing. So he remembered how he had been going in that direction, and when he was reversing, he did the same route back again. And that's pretty amazing to have a driver who could think like that. So this is the commander's position, where I spent 12 months doing my conscript service in a Mark 10, which is similar to this one, and a lot of time as a platoon commander, and then later on as a company commander in the diesel version 104. And as a company commander, I needed to have a gunner and a driver that was capable of working on their own, because my focus was on both the tank and to lead the rest of the company. So I needed to have people that could understand what I wanted and to work on their own. And as a loader on the other side, I picked a good tank commander instead of a loader, because the main focus for him was to assist me in the role in the turret, listening and talking to the radio, helping the other crew members, etc. So loading the gun, well, he was capable of doing that, but that was not his main task to do, because we had this was the commander for the whole company. And at the back we have two radios, one for the company and one for the upper level, the battalion. And on this one you could switch depending on who's gonna listen. And normally you try to listen on both radios at the same time, which was not very easy because they were talking constantly on both of them, and you had to try to find out which of these messages are important for me. But sometimes you needed to talk to the platoon commanders, then you could switch over and talk to the platoon commanders, and then the loader took over and listened to the battalion net instead, or you could switch. So that was always something that you had to do, and you had to look out to spot the enemy and see where we were going, reading the map, talking to the battalion commander, talking to the platoon commander. So it was a very busy job. But I can say best job I ever had. So this is my number 2. So that was 4 tanks that actually you can see in Bovington at the Tank Museum. But I was supposed to give my top 5, so there's one missing. So we have to pick number 1. And this is my number 1. The German LK2, designed and produced towards the end of First World War in 1918. But it never got to the front because the war ended in 1918. So they were still at the factories in Germany. We're not sure how many they produced. or how many they were intended to produce. We haven't found the documents for that. But Sweden bought 10 of them in 1921. And since Germany was not allowed to sell, to export military equipment after the First World War, they were sold as tractor parts and steel plates, smuggled to Sweden and assembled in Stockholm. And why would Sweden need tanks in 1921? Who was the enemy? Who would invade Sweden? No one. So why tanks? Well, there had been a situation in Russia, Soviet Union in 1917, the revolution, the independent war in Finland in 1918, and a lot of conflicts in the Baltic states. So the Swedish government, they were afraid that this would also get to Sweden, so there would be some sort of a revolution, uprising or whatever. So they thought they needed tanks for the protection of the government and the king. But it never happened, so there we were with 10 tanks and what to do with them. So they gave them to the army. 10 tanks, use them, find out how you can use them in the best way. And they started with trials in Stockholm in 1922. And they were used towards mid-1930s when they were taken out of service. And this is one of the rebuilt vehicles. They rebuilt 5 of them in 1929 to 1931 and changed the engine to a better one. Originally there was a Benz 4-cylinder engine, and we still have one of these tanks in the display. And this is one of the rebuilt with the upgraded engine. And we were supposed to go to Tankfest this year, 2020, with this tank to show it to the world. But something happened in the world and we were not able to fulfill that tragedy, but we hope someday. 20 years ago, I came up with the idea that we should restore one of these first tanks that was still in existence. There were 4 of them still in existence. One in Germany, given back in '93. One original with a Benz engine and 2 of the upgraded version, one empty hull and this one. We had at the regiment here in Strängnäs where I was working, we had a collection of running vehicles and also one of the empty hulls of one of these. I thought it could be a great idea to restore it. And that was 20 years ago. We had just finished the restoration of a Czech light tankette that we brought to Beltring the same year, 2000, and that was a great success. So how hard can it be? Why not restore this one? So we started on the project back then, but then the regiment was closed down due to reduction of the army, and in 2008-9 we started to plan for a museum. So there were a lot of things that happened that came in the way. But in approximately 2012 we started to think, why not take up this again and restore it. At the time we had this vehicle, it was lacking the engine, but the radiator, gearbox and steering transmission was all there, so it shouldn't be that hard to do it. We had an engine that we had found in a scrapyard, and we started to take it all apart. It's different compared to modern tanks, how it's assembled, so it was not that easy to take it apart. And all those pointy things on the side and the front, it looks like rivets, but it's not. They're actually bolts with this pointy head. So it's bolted together. So it was quite easy compared to other things to take it apart. And in 2018, we drove it for the first time under own power. 100 years after it was built, it ran for the first time. And we think that was about 8 years since it last ran with engine on the inside. And in June that year, we had an opening here at the museum where we showed it to the public. A great success with this 100-year-old tank. And then we started to plan for going to Tankfest with it. And the aim was to be there this year. We had all planned, and all of a sudden, no, it's not going to happen. But I hope that one day we will be able to take it overseas and tour the world with the oldest German-produced running tank in the world. So this was a project that started as an idea 20 years ago, and we finished it, we made it, and we brought this 100 years old tank back to life again. And that is why this is my number one. So those were my top 5, and if you like this film, please subscribe to the Tank Museum YouTube channel. And if you are a bit curious about what we have in Sweden, please check out our Facebook and YouTube channel. Till next time, bye-bye.
We are a charity here at the Tank Museum, so if you can support us, please do. Consider joining our Patreon scheme or becoming a member of the Friends. Any donations will go directly towards the Tank Museum and its activities.